Mao had never lost control over the army. It would be the instrumental force behind a harsh, new revolutionary order. Having smashed the old world, rebels of all persuasions would join the first Red Guards on the wrong side of history. The free-for-all atmosphere of the preceding months dissipated. Those who had used the relative anarchy to question the system were now systematically singled out.
The Cultural Revolution leading group said, "On family background is a poisonous weed." Our paper was closed down. My brother was put under surveillance. He was followed everywhere.
Far more poisonous than Yulo Ke's many essays were the entries in his personal diary. In May 1966, as the media whipped up popular zeal to weed out enemies of Mao Zedong thought, Yulo Ke quoted Montesquieu's Persian letters. In order to love and conform to one's religion, it is not necessary to hate and persecute those who do not conform to it. The words religion, wrote Yulo Ke, can simply be replaced by Marxism, Leninism, or someone's thought. The diary fell into the hands of the authorities.
On January 5, 1968, he went to work as usual but didn't return. We knew he'd been arrested.
By the end of 1967, I was sick of the factional struggles at school. I didn't know what the revolution was about anymore. Just then, recruiters came to sign up workers to build a factory in a remote area. There, it would be safe from attack by the imperialists. I could be a worker, the kind that Chairman Mao wanted, a revolutionary worker, like the morning sun still rising. Although I was treated as a so-called bastard, I wrote in my diary every day, "Follow Chairman Mao in revolution." I thought if I died for the revolution, my diary would convince people of my true revolutionary loyalty.
在毛主席最新指示鼓舞下，全国展开了一个上山下乡的大动员。毛主席的最新指示是反修防修的百年大计、千年大计。
For some time, small numbers of young people from cities had been settling in the countryside. By really becoming one with the people, they hoped to put their ideals into practice. In late 1968, colleges were still closed and urban jobs scarce. A huge backlog of high school students had built up in the cities. Now these restive young people had somewhere to go.
I went to the countryside voluntarily. At first, I felt a great sense of mission, to help close the gap between the countryside and the city. Change should start with ourselves, so that we could carry the Cultural Revolution through to the end.
The imagery was upbeat, not only in the official media, but even in personal photographs. Other stories left no visual record.
Rumors about me reached the village before I arrived. Sung Be Militant is coming to settle here. The one who burns, loots, and rapes. The villagers were afraid, and they didn't want me there. But by working hard with them, I was able to gain their acceptance, and they came to treat me with great kindness. My father named me Bin Bin because he wanted a daughter who was gentle and refined, and I was indeed like that. If my name hadn't meant gentle, Ma wouldn't have said, better to be militant, and then there wouldn't have been all these rumors. The name Sung Be Militant is totally against my beliefs. It's sad how history could have played such a bad joke.
We'd already had doubts about the Cultural Revolution. How come the political struggles under our great leader were so devious? Once we got to the countryside, we were in for a greater shock. The realities of China had nothing to do with what was in our books. The lives of the peasants were truly miserable. This experience led to a further liberation of our thinking. We began to confront the larger political myth, the so-called superiority of the socialist system.
I often wondered why Mao sent us young people to the countryside. because he turned so many of us into heretics. Mao should have known that the peasants would tell us things. For example, around 1960, many people had starved to death. So we started to feel disillusioned. It was a very painful process. My thinking underwent a fundamental change.
We read a lot of Western literature, and we talked to each other. The countryside was a vast, free realm. In the city, if you listened to Voice of America, your neighbor would report you. But in the countryside, we were beyond anyone's control.
As these young people were questioning their revolutionary faith, the personality cult of Chairman Mao grew ever more extravagant. The votive images were more numerous, the adulation more excessive. There was a Mao for all seasons, a thought for every clime.
这是一所半工半读的聋哑学校，他们对伟大领袖毛主席无限热爱，可是他们有嘴喊不出毛主席万岁。
Mao's thought could answer all questions. It could even cure the incurable.
他们运用毛主席的光辉思想，不断丰富和发展了治疗聋哑病的经验。
毛主席万岁！毛主席万岁！
经过2个多月的精心治疗，全校105名聋哑学生终于全部恢复了听力。深受迫害的聋哑人再也按不住满腔的怒火，千仇万恨都要集中到刘少奇的身上。就是他推行反革命修正主义卫生路线，就是他把我们打成了不治之症。他是劳动人民的死敌，他是聋哑人的死敌。
Shrouded in secrecy and long overdue, the Ninth Party Congress in 1969 was the first to be held in 13 years. It came at a moment of great victory for the Cultural Revolution, the media declared. Most of the delegates were new, thrown up by the Cultural Revolution. Many of the original Central Committee members were absent, having been purged. Mao took the chair. On his right, Premier Zhou Enlai, who would weather every political storm. On his left, the party's vice chairman and Mao's heir apparent, Lin Biao. Lin Biao was written into the party's constitution as the chairman's successor. Xiao Qi, Mao's previous hand-picked successor, had not been seen in public since 1966.
The Ninth Congress was a declaration of victory for the Maoists. But we'd already begun rethinking the socialist system. We were the first students to identify with their radical thinking, but we soon discovered it was just a delusion. Back then, all debate was within the framework of revolutionary ideology. That is, whose ideas were closer to revolutionary fundamentalism. It's like past debates within the church. Some advocated that the people should have direct access to God's words. Actually, they were reclaiming from the clergy the right to think for themselves. Similarly, with the Red Guard movement, the people reclaimed from the party apparatus the right to think for themselves. That is, any authority figure could be questioned. Of course, at first that was limited to anyone under Mao, or even under Lin Biao, but it was only one small step away from questioning them too. By the time of the Ninth Congress, all I could do was laugh at how absurd they were. In the film, the leftists are seated on the left, and they get a lot of time on camera. The rightists are on the right. They're the old party officials, and the camera pans over them quickly. The film shows something very rare. You actually hear Mao speaking in his own voice.
民调感知宿主的政治报告，站着不站着呢？站着就举手。
The repeated assertions of unity and victory masked deep divisions among what were merely temporary allies. The only unchallengeable figure, the only fixed point, was Mao. Within 2.5 years, the firmly enshrined successor Lin Biao would fall, both figuratively and literally. Accused of plotting to assassinate Mao, Lin Biao died in a mysterious plane crash. The only certainty was that the charred bodies were those of Lin, of his wife, and of his son.
Lin Biao was the one who attacked my father most viciously. And then, suddenly Lin Biao was no longer Chairman Mao's successor. Now they said he'd been plotting to assassinate the chairman. This had a profound impact on the way people saw the Cultural Revolution. So we wrote to Chairman Mao, we want to see our parents.
I said I can't see them. Being in a place like this, how can I face my children? Everyone knows that Chinchong is a prison, a place for locking up bad people. And that's where I am. I can't see them. He said, it is Chairman Mao's directive that you see them. How can you say it's his directive, I asked. And he took out a note written by the chairman.
The father's dead, but they can see the mother. We were astounded when we read this.
Seeing the note, I asked, Shaoqi's dead? Can this be true? He said, yes, he's dead. But the children can see you. This is the chairman's order. But he wouldn't tell me what happened. He said, that's none of your business.
We later learned that my father had died from pneumonia in the city of Kaifeng. When they carried his body out, he didn't even have any clothes on. They kept him alive until the 9th Party Congress, so he could be denounced as a living example of a traitor. After that, it didn't matter. He fell ill and was left to die.
Liu Shaoqi died on November the 12th, 1969. Institutional extremism was filling every corner of society. New and heinous plots were constantly being uncovered and thwarted. Prisons and labour camps filled up, and new ones were built. A combination of state power and what was dubbed the dictatorship of the masses dealt ruthlessly with the ever-changing face of counter-revolution.
当时中新公报所有的人几乎都受到审查。
Everyone involved with our paper was interrogated. We were pressured to say things that would incriminate my brother or each other. But no one gave in. We admired the gadfly. It was my brother who introduced me to the book. We used the gadfly's example to encourage each other. He wrote to his girlfriend before his execution. Then am I a happy fly, if I live or if I die. I wrote a poem to my own girlfriend, using these lines. We were inspired by his calm defiance even when facing death. I think everything we did was worthy of his example. The police came to our house with a notification from my father. Sign this, they said. Your son's been shot. My father was so devastated he crumpled on the spot and wailed. What's all this crying for? You're supposed to draw a clear line between yourself and your son. That's the way they talked.
The revolution was devouring old revolutionaries like Liu Shaoqi, as well as the children of fallen capitalists like Yulo Ke. Individuals, regardless of their background or history, could all be sacrificed in its name. As China descended into darkness, the world presented on stage was ever more luminous. It was a sanitized realm in which enemies were constantly vanquished, heroic struggles forever victorious, and martyrs for the cause celebrated with shrill calls for ongoing revolution. By now, the one-dimensional heroes of a few model works had lost any power to inspire. The cycles of revolution left the population exhausted. Pent-up frustrations would take several years to find an outlet. Zhou Enlai, for decades Premier of China, died in January 1976. He was regarded as a bastion of moderation compared to the extremists who had risen to power in the chaos.
My awakening came late. It was not until the April 5th Tiananmen incident that I finally became disillusioned with Mao.
April the 5th was the traditional Chinese Day of Remembrance, but in 1976 it would herald the passing of an era. Crowds spontaneously gathered in Tiananmen Square to lay wreaths and recite poems in Zhou Enlai's memory. They came to honor the dead, but the outpouring of grief was a protest against the living. The people weep while jackals laugh, one poem read. Squads of the workers' militia were sent in with clubs.
I had believed in the Communist Party because it was for the people. Now it was beating the people up. It wasn't the party I thought it was. I felt very sad. I started to have doubts about Mao. Then I thought, if Mao was wrong, my father might be right. But I didn't know where my father was, whether he was dead or alive.
The April 5th Tiananmen incident was devastating. By 1976, we already felt alien revolution. The Cultural Revolution had pushed the revolutionary culture of socialist China to ever greater extremes. At the same time, it exposed its dark side. In this context, one thing Marx said about revolution could be reversed. That is, long live the revolution. The revolution is dead. Whoever tries to immortalize revolution will be the one who kills revolution. That's exactly what Mao did.
Mao himself wouldn't die until September that year, but the protests in Tiananmen signaled his passing as surely as if he'd already drawn his last breath. Within weeks of Mao's death, the so-called Gang of Four, Mao's wife and her radical associates, were arrested and eventually tried. The reign of revolutionary fundamentalism had come to an end. Now the Gang of Four was blamed for everything, just as Peng Dehuai, Liu Shaoqi and Lin Biao had been before them. Although there was talk of a Gang of Five, public debate about Mao would be stifled time and again. Obstacles to the rehabilitation of those who'd been jailed, exiled or killed over the decades took years to overcome. After a 2-year search, Li Nanyang finally located her father in a remote village in southern China. She hadn't seen him in 11 years.
My father waited for me to call him Dad. I hadn't used that word for so many years. It took me a long time to get it out. I knew that as soon as I called him Dad, the clear line that I had drawn between myself and an enemy of the party would vanish. He would simply be my father. I finally came out with it, and he cried.
Those were the happiest days of my life. Finally, I was free to speak my mind, unlike 1967. She was too young then, and it was at the height of the Cultural Revolution.
After we talked, I said to my father, "You have been wronged. You are a good person, and I'll try to clear your name."
Around 1979, many so-called bourgeois and revisionist films were shown again. The Gadfly was among them. Seeing it this time, I was struck by something that I hadn't really noticed before. It was the prison cell conversation between the Gadfly and his father.
你对人撒谎，说在主的面前暴露秘密是可以永远保留的。你对主也撒过谎，你又曾经起过誓，可是你违背了。亚瑟，
我看流氓对蒙塔尼尼的那种。
Arthur lashed out at Montanelli. It was a denunciation mixed with a lingering love, a hope that he might change. But he realized this was impossible. The scene made me think about the revolutionary culture that I had internalized when I was younger, what had attracted me, and what I had come to reject. The attraction was a sense of moral justice. And as I reflected on the lies and deceptions we'd experienced, just like Arthur, I thought about my cardinal, my relationship with the culture of the Communist Party. It felt very much like Arthur's farewell to Montanelli. Now I too would see my own cardinal, my red-cloaked clergy, recede into the distance.
On January 1st, 1979, I received a telegram returning to Beijing on January 4th. I jumped up from my bed. My father's case was resolved. The sun has finally risen for me. For several months afterwards, I was in a daze. I'd been called a bastard for 20 years. And suddenly I am a revolutionary, accepted by everyone? And people acted as though it had always been that way. The new evaluation I received at work now read like the eulogy for a revolutionary martyr. For years I'd thought I was good enough to be a Communist Party member, but they never let me join. Now, overnight, everything had changed, not because of anything I'd ever done, but because my father's name had been cleared. At that moment, the revolutionary ideals that had always sustained me suddenly collapsed. Everything was a lie. Nothing was true. From the moment my father was rehabilitated, I wanted nothing more to do with the party. Nothing more to do with the revolution.
For many, the revolution is dead. Utopian promise now appears in different guises. But the spectre of Mao is never far away. When people feel oppressed and powerless, when a system permits no legitimate protest or dissent, Mao emerges as a possibility, a champion of the right to rebel.
BBC 4 on BBC 2 is back tomorrow with the compelling and sometimes grisly twists and turns of a real-life murder investigation. For Storyville, Death on the Staircase here at 5 past midnight.